I read many things about you, but something special I would like to mention here. Andre's extensive experience in offensive operations gives him what he calls healthy paranoia, helping him anticipate risks from all angles. So, when I look through the names and attending our session today, global and different angles, everybody is here to, share your experience and knowledge about this. And it's not only me, but you are awarded in various prestigious platforms. And Andres is the champion in security education. CISO's Connect Top 100 Award, Top 50 Information Security Professionals Award, 10 Best CISO's C-Level Focus, bronze at the 16th Annual Info Security PG's Global Excellence Award regarding the Startup of the Year Security Software, Leader of the Week, Cyber Startup Observatory, and many others, as the IT leadership is really interesting, full of, questions behind the doors. So when we are talking about good governance and corporate governance, we mean that everything should be accountable and transparent, just the opposite of the security issues. So we are here to see the experience and the, award-winning expert with us. I'm so happy to welcome Andres again. Once again, thank you very much. And he's ready to answer our questions, and feel free to also use the chat box and join our conversations. I can see many people from South Africa, Ghana, Nigeria, from Johannesburg, Cape Town, Zambia, Gauteng, and Botswana, whatever added to the chat, we will see in time. And thank you very much for joining us once again. And I'm ready to ask special questions to Andres. Are you ready, Andres?
Yes, thank you for having me.
So, Andres, let's kick off the things with what do you mean by convergence? I mean, the between governance and the active security. And another important question can be, why now? Thank you.
So the notion of convergence, if you think about the traditional convergence zone, where weather patterns kind of come together and something big happens, I like using that parallel because unfortunately, traditionally there is a fragmented and siloed approach in especially larger organizations between the GRC, governance, risk, and compliance functions, and, for example, cybersecurity functions, which are more pursuing active protection. And I, anything I say here, I am not choosing one side over the other. They each have their place, but they each do serve a different function. Unfortunately, what I've seen over the last 33 years doing this is that they have drifted apart to a large extent. And what I am pushing for, what I call for, is to bring them back together to create that convergence where we can embrace the power of each function. And so if you think about risk, compliance, board oversight, the traditional governance endeavors, and you think about the real-time operations of cybersecurity, it's a very different mindset. But we are all, every single one of these endeavors, we're all responsible for managing risk across an organization. The challenge is that we are rarely aligned. And the point here is to start to push for this alignment. We have to sometimes take a step back. I think from a modern day perspective, environments today have to understand that cyber threats, they're no longer isolated in technology or in finance or whatever. It is a business risk conversation. And unfortunately, a lot of businesses haven't accepted that. They haven't raised the conversation to a business risk level. I think that's one of the big challenges. So, for instance, if you think about a ransomware attack, it doesn't just impact systems. It does impact systems, but it doesn't stop there. There's a downstream effect where shareholder confidence is impacted. You might be violating regulatory mandates. Leadership gaps get exposed when these type of events take place. And I always find that interesting because you see where things start to fall apart, within the little cracks because of an incident. And so I think because of that, convergence is just not optional anymore. It's about future-proofing organizations, and it really is about the survival of these organizations. I'll say this, and I always like giving this parallel because I find it just so very real world. The problem that we find ourselves with today is that we have the notion of these yards and fences. And so if you let's take I'll give you 3 yards, right? The software owners, the owners of a software that's important to an organization, the cybersecurity team, and the GRC team. Those are 3 separate yards with fences in between them. Unfortunately, what we've gotten to as an industry is this notion of throwing things over the fence. So the GRC folks do their work and they do a great job doing that, but then they throw it over the fence to the cybersecurity folks and they throw their hands up and go, well, I did my part. Now it's your problem. And then cybersecurity does whatever they can, and then they throw it over the fence to the application team. And the application team sits there going, what am I supposed to do with this? There isn't that holistic approach, that convergence to pursue a real solution to a problem. And we have to break down these silos. I think the industry is at a point where that's just no longer acceptable.
So, in this respect, you are talking about the environmental drivers, different angles, software, GRC, and cybersecurity colleagues. You have described several forces pushing us towards convergence issue. In asking the right question, maybe what's the most underappreciated driver among these, considering the environmental issues and communication style and everything?
So there are a couple of important issues that I think are underappreciated, underrepresented in business. First of all, stakeholder pressure is really underplayed, in my opinion. You have boards, you have regulators, you have insurers. They're starting to ask sharper questions. Anybody who's done a cyber insurance questionnaire over the last, let's say, 5 or 6 years, you've probably seen that the questions have gotten very strategic and very tough. It used to be easy to get insurance. Now it's no longer that easy. And so these entities, especially external.
Hi. I've got to drop off at the bottom of the hour. I just remembered I said to Hurt I'd join him on a 15-minute call. So sorry about that. Okay, I've got your email. We were down at number 10, right? Yeah, that's right. Receive, for example, discussion. We did that already. Where did we see that in?
So 13, item 13. So we know that that's an issue. There's a workaround required for 13.
Yeah.
So the first, let's go to 14. So they've got to create a doodle poll to get the date and time of any one member of the council. And say, hey guys, I'd like to start this conference. He or she might have one or no or full house response. When the date time is confirmed, the participant creates a Zoom meeting.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Peter. I'll call you back. Sorry. Hi, Cesar.
She's on mute.
Sorry about this. We can continue. Sorry
Okay.
about the
No
technical
problem.
issue.
No
Thank you
problem.
for your understanding and patience. Get ready for Andres' next, explanations, valuable explanations. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think I was talking about the cyber insurance industry, for example, and those external entities that are looking inwards at what's happening within an organization, they really are getting savvy to the game, and they're no longer accepting these siloed environments where it's kind of like the finger pointing happens. They want to see integrated views of risk that are wholly aligned with business priorities. For example, a lot of entities now want to understand cyber risk quantification, and cyber risk quantification is one area that if you really take the convergence notion, it is exactly where it applies. I'll give you an example. Let's say an organization has a database with PII. How's a risk professional or a cybersecurity professional positioned properly to analyze that data and place a financial value on the impact of a breach to that data? The answer is that they're not. They don't have the expertise with that data set. There's someone else who has it, right? An application owner, a database owner, something of some entity of that sort. And so to get a realistic CRQ value for some resource that is of value to the organization, that convergence has to exist so that there's enough healthy collaboration in terms of finding those values and then, in turn sharing that out to auditors and entities like those. And so I think the real sum value here, the real sum statement is that if we don't treat cyber risk as business risk, we're doing an organization a disservice. Now, I will tell you that in some organizations, and I've been doing this 33 years, so just understand this is a real world perspective from experience. Some organizations do not embrace that notion that I just mentioned. And as a real example, obviously I'm not going to get into names, but I worked with a CEO who was more interested in having plausible deniability than embracing risk. And so when I would bring risk to the table to the CEO and his leadership team, there was always a reluctance to absorb the information because they wanted to be able to have, in the face of a legal matter, they wanted to be able to have that plausible deniability and literally just point the finger back at the CISO. And, if you're in the business of being a CISO, you have to be aware of that because that's just reality. Granted, the textbooks say it shouldn't be that way, but this is the way it is in the real world. CEOs go to their legal officers and say, hey, should I get involved with this risk? And of course, a lawyer is going to say no, because now you're taking on risk. And so, there's a reality to that. I think another challenge that I feel is really underplayed, and if you live in real corporate environments, you see this all the time, is that CISOs, GRC leaders, and business folks speak different languages.
Yeah.
And when you're speaking different languages, you create a communication gap. And if you don't close that, let's say with shared metrics, with shared OKRs, with real collaborative exercises, we're setting ourselves up for governance failure, especially during a crisis. And so, you'll hear people talk about collaboration, but when you get in the room for the quote unquote collaboration sessions, it's not true collaboration. So I think that would be my my answer to your second question.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So I'm currently in the university as an associate professor and used to be in the practice. And I can understand the importance of, convergence between theory and practice so that we can be more useful. And this is not only in this respect, also We have heard a lot about the Uber, Microsoft, and Mark's incidents. And what do these cases reveal about the cost of failing or succeeding at convergence? What do you think about this?
So those are strong examples, especially Uber. I think, Uber is a cautionary tale. Obviously, a successful company, and they've invested heavily in security and GRC. Um, Uber's GRC apparatus on paper was amazing, or is amazing. If you look at their certification and compliance page, they have every little badge on the planet, right? And yet they've had how many breaches? And that right there tells you there's an operational disconnection between the GRC world of today and the actual operational cybersecurity world that has to introduce controls and true protection. And that disconnect can lead to a ton of problems, and especially in the public space where you have to disclose information within certain timeframes, that dysfunction becomes a real problem. On the
Yeah.
other side, if you just look at some of the more successful examples, like the Maersk incident, um, I think it took them something like 10 days to rebuild something that should have taken months. And that's impressive because what they did is they really converged on a problem. They brought in all the proper resources, and the leadership forced that collaboration and said, solve this problem, as opposed to accepting the siloed tradition that exists in most organizations. And so I think there's an interesting dynamic there because you start to realize that the industry has really become very tool centric, not knowledge centric. And this is a problem that's not going to be solved by tools. It's about having aligned leadership and the right mindset. I mean, yeah, tooling is a part of it, but that's not the end all answer. It's about that leadership and pushing towards the right goal collaboratively. And so I think, if you look at the Uber and Maersk cases on opposite ends of an extremity, you see some interesting dynamics.
So here you are talking about the operationalization, let's say, implementation side. And what does convergence actually look like inside an organization when we talk about making it operational and the implementation to be a success story?
So the first thing is to acknowledge and accept, because sometimes it's tough to accept, but accept the fact that this is not about organizational structure or tooling. It's about behavior and organizational culture. And so, for example, in some organizations, you'll see a joint governance security committee that reports up to a board. You'll see really impressive dashboards, for example, that show operational and compliance risk together. That's a form of convergence right there. And that becomes effective because you start to show board members that you're working as one cohesive unit, as opposed to, oh, here's GRC presented risk, here's cyber presented risk, here's financial presented risk. It has to be treated as business risk. One thing that you'll start to see a lot of, which I think is a push in the right direction, is cross-functional tabletop exercises. For example, bringing in privacy, legal, security, communications, and business leaders, and forcing them to go through a mock exercise. And granted, tabletop exercises have constraints, have rules of engagement, but it's better than not doing anything. And forcing these folks to actually sit down, work together, and work through a problem. What this also means for a CISO is that you start to come out of that situation, that organizational structure of being buried under IT, because for many years, CISOs were buried in the IT organization, and they didn't even have a voice at the board level or at the business level. The CTOs and the CIOs did. And so the fact that you have now decision-making capability or impact on M&A exercises where, security debt becomes a real problem with M&As. But the fact that you have that level of visibility, especially when you do these tabletop exercises, becomes a real positive in terms of creating that cohesion between these typically siloed teams. I think beyond that, you have to understand that entities need to understand what they're protecting. Because at the end of the day, if you're performing a compliance, report, let's say, for the sake of doing it, or for the sake of the fact that you were forced to do it, that's very different than saying, I want to do this because I know that this has to be protected. And that to me is important, because understanding what it is that we're supposed to protect, that's at the core of what we should be doing. And I stress the should part because a lot of entities have strayed away from that, and they just do it because they have to. You need to understand why you're doing it. You have
So,
to, yeah, just one quick last point on this,
yeah.
because I think one of the missing pieces that I've seen is that there is no, in many cases, there's no one entity that oversees the end-to-end journey from risk identification to remediation. It goes back to that fence analogy, right? One team does a part of that journey and throws it over to the other part, but nobody's overseeing the entire thing. I think that's a challenge.
Yeah, here there is a critical point. You mentioned about the behavior and the culture, and then our focus becomes to the organizational and governance structure. In that respect, where do organizations typically get this wrong? What can you tell about
Yeah,
this?
I think organizations that get it wrong, they assume that convergence is a tooling problem, and it's not. It's a leadership problem. It's an organizational culture problem. Silos typically persist because priorities are misaligned. Cybersecurity is prioritized here, and GRC is prioritized over there, and they don't align, and that's a problem. Like, for instance, compliance teams, they focus on reports and audit checkboxes and all that. Security teams are chasing active threats and trying to build protections around that. Bridging that divide requires shared goals and a shared language, which in some cases don't exist. And I understand there's going to be turf battles and budget battles and all that, but an inactive approach to that problem is even way costlier, especially in the face of an incident. Incidents bring out sometimes the worst in teams and the worst in people. And so, as a leader, you can't accept that type of fragmentation. You need to become, I hate to use cliches, but you need to become that change agent that tries to look towards the real problem that we're trying to solve and bring teams together to pursue a solution towards that problem. We all play a part in it. But as a leader, if you accept the norm and the silos, it's a problem. And it's a problem of trust. I'll give you an example, real world example. I went through an audit, and I was running tactical and operational elements for this very large global organization. And they sent these three auditors to audit my security operations. And three young people, very bright people. And when we sat down, I asked them, what's the objective here, right? What do you aim to accomplish? And they said to me, well, we'll analyze your operations, and then we'll give you recommendations based on the deficiencies. And I said, that's great. How many security operations have you guys built? And they were like, well, none. And I'm like, so how does that qualify you to give me recommendations when I've been doing this 30 years? And there was this awkward silence, but they realized they were not qualified to perform that function. Yet this company hired them to perform the function. And so that created a culture of distrust instantly. Now, I'm a little more mature than to let that become a problem. I worked with them. We figured out how to make this a success. And, I feel I helped them out along that journey, especially to learn, real world concepts and stuff. But that's an example of where that went wrong.
That's a practical issue. I face similar things, used to work in auditing company. And this means we need to have a forward-thinking strategy.
Yep.
And in this strategy, technology people, especially the CISOs, are quite critical. And how should CISOs lead this shift, especially in organizations with interest programs and structures, so that we have this forward-thinking strategy to be successful? What do you think? Thank you.
Yeah, this is probably one of the biggest challenging areas for CISOs, especially up and coming CISOs. I think you need to acknowledge the fact that you have to lean into the business leadership space. And nobody's going to sit there and welcome you with open arms. That's not going to happen. So you have to figure out how to inject yourself into that space. One example is you could start by building joint KPIs between risk, governance, cybersecurity. And once you can start joining elements with those shared goals, then you can start having collaborative drills. And then you can start, for example, training the board, not annually, once a year. This has to be continuous, but training the board on what security means within the context of governance, within the context of protection. But you send one message upstream. You don't send siloed, fragmented messages. And that has to be, like I said, continuous. Another thing that you have to really start pursuing is embracing and embedding security as a part of design for things that are being built, for things that are happening. If we keep treating security as an afterthought, which still happens today, that's a real problem. And that's where it starts to become a test of your influence capability as a CISO. Because if you think that as a CISO, you're going to impose demands on people and it's just going to happen, that is unrealistic and delusional, no matter what any textbook says. The world doesn't work that way. Humans don't work that way. You have to get your peers to want to do this with you. And, it's like that old saying, right? You catch more flies with honey. You get a lot more traction when you have people on your side wanting to be part of this.
Yeah, we
I
have
also
a contribution from the chat box. Werner Van Zyl, if I read the name correctly. Scenario planning is also important. What do you think?
Absolutely. And, the way you model your scenarios is absolutely critical because, again, if you think of like tabletops and those kind of exercises or red team exercises, if you just bring in an entity to perform a red team, for example, they're going to do what makes sense to them because that's easy. But if you force the modeling to be very subjective to your organization based on your understanding of your organization, that scenario planning becomes valuable, not just important. It becomes valuable because you're saying, okay, I know we have a weakness in this area. I need you all, the external experts, to come in and simulate what an attacker would do against this because I know that this is a problem. So scenario planning that is strategic and subjective, I think, is absolutely critical.
So we all know that you have a quite experience in this scope, and we need to talk about the identity risk related to convergence. And given your leadership at Constella Intelligence, in addition to your 30 years experience more, how does identity risk intelligence fit into this convergence model? What can you tell us about this? Thank you.
So very similar to what I just said about planning scenarios, that subjective intelligence of an organization is critical. So if you bring the identity centric model into this equation, identity risk intelligence, to me, it's really like a connective tissue between governance and security. Look, modern day threat actors, they don't go after networks or firewalls or even endpoints at this point. They go after data. They try to disrupt systems. And the easiest path in is through exploiting people, exploiting identities, or social engineering. But at the end of the day, it's still an identity-driven attack. If you think about phishing and synthetic identities and credential abuse, right? Finding credentials out on the dark web and all those interesting places, it's just an easy path in. So now all of a sudden, nobody has to break in. You could just walk in the front door because you have credentials. And everybody, well, MFA is in place. Well, have you looked at info stealer leaks? Because info stealer leaks give you session objects that allow you to bypass MFA. So there's always a way around. Attackers are quite crafty. And real-time visibility into identity exposure to me is absolutely critical these days. Critical to the point that it should inform not only protective mechanisms, but policy as well. And without that intelligence loop to understand the risk from your identity exposures, really convergence remains kind of blind because you just don't understand your attack surface. And so I think from the perspective of what I do at Constella, our data and our intelligence around that data really sits at the apex of that convergence area, that convergence zone. And it really is where you can see every single piece of siloed part of an organization. They all come together because they all have identities. And so identity to me is at the core of that.
So when we talk about identity and all, organizational operations, business models and everything, we see that artificial intelligence and automation is used in many cases, and it's getting more and more involved in all operations. And in this respect, artificial intelligence and automation in convergence can be, another issue. And how should AI and automation be leveraged in converged security governance models? What do you think about this?
So I think first and foremost, you have to acknowledge that, AI and intelligent automation, they're not just operational accelerators, because I think a lot of folks treat it that way. If we treat them as enablers of convergence, I think we have a path forward where we can use these technological advancements to help us move things in the right direction. So I would think of it this way. Look at, like, for example, volume of signals as an example. AI, if you implement it properly, can translate technical signals at large scale into business risk language far more effective than a human can. Because if you've ever dealt with a large organization, you know what kind of volume of traffic data and alert data and risk data gets generated. Converting that in some streamlined fashion into business risk data, business risk language, that is one area where I find AI to be super effective. So if you imagine mapping threat activity to a compliance posture in real time, AI can do that. I don't know one human that can do that. But the key here is understanding your environment, understanding your data, and having intentional design. Because it's not just, oh, bring in this AI engine, it'll do it for us. It doesn't work that way. You have to tell it exactly what you want done. And so in the case of our conversation here, security and GRC align on a specific set of outcomes, and then you train an AI engine and a model to give you that outcome. I think that's success. That's where you get past all of the noise and move into strategic insight. Because right now, if you look at the large volumes of data, there's just a lot of noise in there. And the point is to clarify that all, to have strategic and directed insight.
When you are saying something strategic and, intentional design and your way of, organizing the business model and everything, it comes to the boardroom engagement, because leadership is quite critical here. How do you get boardrooms to buy into all of this, especially when some still, see security as a cost center? You must experience this several times because they are mostly oriented to have the profit maximization, but they don't want to talk about the cost issues. What do you think about this? Thank you.
Yeah, so first and foremost, understand that the initial reaction to a cybersecurity leader in a boardroom is that you're a necessary evil. They don't want you there, but they know they have to have you there. And, it's not a bad thing. It's just the nature. You're talking about boards that have been around for, 80 years. They look at the world a certain way. And if you look at the makeup of board members, they're not like us. So they look at the world through a different lens. And so I think first and foremost is understanding that, and understanding that they speak a different language than we do. And you can't expect them to understand our language. So you have to learn how to translate from our language to their language, because it's the only way that you're going to get any support by way of them absorbing your messaging. And so once you can figure out how to speak their language, then it's a matter of reframing the narrative. You have to make board members understand that cybersecurity, for example, is not just a defensive function. It's a differentiator. It's strategic. Traditionally, security is not viewed as a strategic differentiator. It's viewed as, like you said, overhead. It's viewed as a necessary evil. You got to change that narrative. You got to use business examples to show financial impact on organizations. I brought up cyber risk quantification earlier. Board members love that if when done properly, because now you say, look, this risk, if actualized, will cost you this much. It has to be that simple. You can't get into complex formulas and models and none of that will work. You literally have to go in there and say, okay, listen, these are our top 3 areas of risk. If each one of these gets impacted, it's going to cost A, B, and C. Are you ready to incur that cost? Oh, you're not? Okay, so to remediate A is going to cost this much, right? And it becomes a conversation that they understand because they understand money. And when you tie metrics and you tie risk and you tie business continuity to money, now you're talking a language that they understand, and you'll get the buy-in that you need because they understand you now, right? They don't understand indicators of compromise. They understand $20 million if this database gets breached. Oh, tell me about that. That's just the reality of modern day boards and even traditional boards. And so you have to understand, you have to speak their language and translate your world into their language.
Yeah, it may become too late to realize the importance and having this convergence done. But if we think about the sustainability issue and globalization after this technology and, making another vision for the business world, do you see convergence as something that can scale beyond the individual organizations, perhaps sectoral or national levels, so that we can have the big picture and have the sustainability approach as well? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that it is something that is possible. More importantly, it's something that has to happen. If you think about, let's talk about sectors like critical infrastructure, healthcare, energy. These sectors are deeply interconnected, and these sectors touch our day-to-day personal lives. They touch our family lives. These are not things that we can treat as, oh, that's their problem. It's a problem for all of us. And so if you realize that, one, it hits home, but two, they are deeply interconnected, you start to see things, from a different perspective. So for example, a supply chain breach in one of those sectors can cascade across an entire ecosystem. And if you look at the convergence of these sectors, it means things like shared threat intelligence, collaboration at a regulatory level, joint incident response frameworks. Those things are totally possible. It comes down to entities wanting to work together for some greater good. And at a national level, I think it means aligning, cyber governance with national security and national resilience strategies. We can't continue to silo resilience because here's the real challenge. When we have these silos in place and we have, whatever, all these great policies in place, you think attackers care about any of that? Attackers don't play by any rules. So, like, for example, when you put a policy in place, that's to keep the good guys behaving good. The attackers don't care about your policy. Unless you have enforcement mechanisms for that policy, it doesn't matter. They're going to play by their own rules and break your rules. And so I think that deep interconnection between these sectors is an absolute must. And frankly, the human future depends on that.
So we have additional contribution from chat box. They need understand the bottom line from Werner von Zane. Thank you very much. If
Yeah.
you would like to say something.
Yeah, I totally agree. And again, organizational culture matters. And let me just give you an example. Some organizations do look at bottom line, but some look at top line. The very different mindset, even though you're talking about generally the same difference, right? You need, as a leader in this space, you need to understand your culture, your organizational culture, and you need to understand, more importantly, the audience that you're talking to. So, for example, if you're talking to a board of 7 members, not, 7 people just don't think alike. You have to spend time one-on-one with each one of those board members to understand, okay, these 3, they do look at bottom line, but those 4, they look at top line, and this other one only cares about revenue, right? So understanding your audience, I think, is absolutely important, but definitely a valid point that understanding. I think the key part of Werner's statement is the understanding of what it is we're talking about so that we can speak the same language.
Thank you. Andres, after having this much experience and considering our future to be a success, what is your expectation for 3 to 5 years period regarding convergence, governance issues, and cybersecurity risks? Thank you.
I think we're going to see something. Well, let me not say I think. I hope we'll see something interesting by way of convergence maturity curve being developed. It is an absolute problem. And, if you look at things like DevOps, organizations have embraced a maturity curve to push DevOps as a function into a positive space. And I think we're at the point where we need to see the same happen from a convergence perspective. If you think about it, measuring resilience as a board level set of KPIs, that's something that requires a maturity. It just doesn't happen, in environments that are not ready for that. The organization has to be ready to embrace that. And I think once you get that curve in place and you have CISOs, for instance, working with that curve, you'll start to see that you're not treated anymore as a technologist. You're treated as a strategic risk officer. You're treated as, someone who can provide advice at a business level because you hold expertise in terms of performing safe business, not just performing business. There's a difference. And so, those that don't embrace a curve like that, they'll keep failing audits and they'll keep recovering slowly after, every breach and stuff like that. I will state that, a friend of mine, Patrick Hayes, he just recently released a book called Integrated Assurance. And that book and what he covers in that book touches a lot of the points that we've talked about today. And I urge all of you to check it out because there's really good information in there. He includes what he calls an integrated assurance maturity model. And that model really, ultimately, it's a strategy to reduce that friction that we've talked about, because of the operating silos that we're used to. And if you think about a model that can force the harmonization of multiple frameworks, for example, that are used in IT security risk, but they're harmonized in one way, that's the kind of stuff that the book covers. And I think that it's just a really important subject. So for example, his maturity model lays out 5 levels: fragmented, defined, aligned, embedded, and institutionalized. And if you think about it, most of the problems that we've talked about today exist in that fragmented space. But anyway, that whole roadmap is in the book, and I think it's a great book not because Patrick's a friend, but I think the book is a great resource for folks that are interested in moving things in the right direction within this space.
So right direction means we need to share our experiences as being award-winning, prestigious guest speaker today. If a CISO watching today wants to start this journey tomorrow, what's the first move? What do you think? What is your advice? What can you say? Thank you.
Start small, but strategic. Every small strategic win will be something that you build on towards a larger end goal. But if you try to, that notion of boiling the ocean, if you try to boil the ocean from day one, you're going to fail. And so start small, be very strategic. Understand that this is going to be a true test of your social skills, of your influential abilities. one piece of advice I try to give everybody is try to align these siloed teams on one shared metric, something that like mean time to risk remediation. That involves multiple teams. It's a cross-functional endeavor. Then run a tabletop with all these teams and bring in legal and communications and folks that normally don't even talk. This is where convergence begins. You have to create that dynamic. It's not going to happen overnight, and it's not going to happen organically. You have to go out there and create it, right? You have to create that mutual visibility, the joint action, the fact that we have to learn and act together before a real crisis hits. The worst thing you want to do is figure things out when your hair's on fire and you're in the middle of an incident. That's awful. I've been through that. It is awful. So as much as you can prepare ahead of time, you have to do that. And then once you have those small wins, you can start to migrate into making this a point of accountability from a cross-functional perspective and expand it out in your organization. But that accountability point is super important, because if people don't feel accountability with some of these changes that you're calling for, it's going to be a conversation and it'll end at that. But for example, if I create shared one set of OKRs that have shared responsibility across 3 separate teams, and guess what? I make those OKRs part of your individual bonuses. People start to pay attention and people start to play together because they want their bonus. And if that's what it takes, so be it. The point is, you'll see the value of working together over time. You may hate it at first, but over time, you're going to see the value, and then you'll see the end result and go, oh, wow, we ended up at such a much better spot than we were before this. Okay, let's keep working together. That's the hope, that we get to that point.
Thank you very much. So step by step, and they should start as soon as possible to be at the top on the right time with their true wishes come true.
Yep.
Andres, thank you very much for this session. We are expecting if any good questions, contributions from the chat box. And also for the last 5 minutes, I would like to inform our audience and everybody to welcome and submit their work to our journal, Advances in Corporate Governance Journal. I'm the editor-in-chief role to serve you, welcome you, and ready to support all your both practical and theoretical work to contribute for the good governance platform, which is nowadays needed everywhere. Wherever you are, you should feel that we need good governance practices, accountability, and being on the safe side within the smart tools and, whatever you use, everything is designed to be user-friendly. But as you learn many things from Andres, it's not that easy. As far as I understand, if the let's say executives or decision makers not convinced that it's not the cost center, rather to have a sustainable business, which is really needed for the organization. And thank you very much for your contributions, Andres, and hope to have this session's output as one of our paper in our journal soon. Would you like to say something? Thank you, Andres.
Yeah, we will definitely. First of all, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. We will definitely turn this into what I feel will be a valuable article for your journal. I think there are some interesting real world lessons here that, I suffered through them. Hopefully you don't have to by reading, about my mistakes and how I had to handle them. And, making mistakes is part of growing, and that's okay. So I look forward to converting this into a written article if, hopefully people will find it valuable.
Thank you very much. All best wishes from İzmir, Turkey. And it's a global and, knowledge sharing platform. We are expecting you to join our next session to welcome new esteemed guest speakers. And please support us with your work and submit your works and articles to our new journal. Hope to see you in Patrick Hayes' session as our next event. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Cesar. Thanks, Andres. Again, my apologies for being on sound. So embarrassing. I'm really glad that you managed to work through that, and we had an exceptional event. I'm just looking at all of the chat, the comments, etc. So thank you very much for joining us today. And thank you for our attendees. If it wasn't for you, we wouldn't host these events. So thank you, attendees, for joining us. And Cesar, thank you again for your enthusiasm, for leading the journal as you are. And I did mention in the chat that, as you mentioned, Andres, Patrick Hayes is coming to speak to us, and we have some other very exciting speakers coming along. And we hope to invite everybody to our journal launch in a summit in October. So we're looking forward to that as well. And please watch the press, watch our emails. We're looking forward to inviting everyone to that. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today, and especially Andreas.